From the wrought-iron balcony of her crumbling Victorian townhouse, Camille Foster watched the four men loitering at the corner through the veil of evening fog. Her gloved hand gripped the ornate railing as she shifted her weight, deliberately, favoring her right leg, a performance rehearsed to perfection over 18 months. The neighborhood children called her Limping Lady, while the local merchants regarded her with that particular blend of pity and discomfort reserved for those marked by visible misfortune. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Little did they know her pronounced limp was the most elaborate lie she'd ever crafted. The autumn air carried a bitter chill as Camille observed the men below, their attention now fixed on her building. She recognized their leader immediately, Vincent Keller, whose distinctive swagger betrayed his identity even in the gathering darkness. She'd been watching his crew for weeks, studying their patterns, learning their weaknesses. Tonight, they'd finally taken notice of her. Perfect timing. The Keller gang had been terrorizing Lockwood Heights for nearly a year, extorting protection money from struggling businesses and infiltrating city politics through intimidation. They saw themselves as untouchable, operating with impunity in a neighborhood where police presence had grown increasingly scarce. But they hadn't encountered someone like Camille before, someone who understood that appearing broken was sometimes the most powerful position of all. As Vincent pointed toward her building, making some remark that caused his companions to laugh, uproariously Camille allowed herself a small, private smile. They saw only what she wanted them to see. A wealthy widow with a severe disability, living alone in a valuable property. An easy mark. What they couldn't possibly know was that Camille Foster had personally brought down 7 of the most notorious criminal operations in 3 states, using nothing but carefully cultivated vulnerability and a mind sharper than any weapon. Her pathway to justice had begun with personal tragedy, but it had evolved into something far more sophisticated. A one-woman operation dedicated to dismantling criminal enterprises that preyed on the vulnerable. Tonight would mark the beginning of the end for the Keller gang. Let them mock her limp. By the time they realized their mistake, it would be far too late. Mrs. Foster, I've brought your evening tea. Camille turned from the balcony to see Eliza, her housekeeper and the only person in Lockwood Heights who knew her secret. At 58, Eliza Harrison possessed the unflappable demeanor of someone who had witnessed enough of life's absurdities to remain unfazed by most surprises, including discovering that her employer's pronounced limp disappeared completely when no outsiders were present. "They're here," Camille said, accepting the teacup with a steady hand. "Right on schedule. The Keller boy and his thugs." Eliza's tone carried equal measures of disdain and concern. "Are you certain this is wise? They've become increasingly violent these past months." Camille took a measured sip of tea, savoring the rich bergamot flavor before responding. "Violence born of overconfidence, Eliza. They've never faced real opposition, which makes them predictable." She gestured toward the street below. "Look how openly they conduct their surveillance. No subtlety whatsoever." Eliza peered over the balcony railing, her lips pressing into a thin line. 4 of them and 1 of you. Those aren't promising odds, mathematics never being my strongest subject. "Ah, but you're forgetting the most important variable." Camille's eyes sparkled with quiet determination. "They believe I'm crippled, alone, and defenseless. Their perception is our greatest advantage." The women retreated inside as the evening fog thickened. Camille's third-floor apartment occupied the entire level of what had once been a grand residence for one of Lockwood's founding families. High ceilings, ornate moldings, and large windows created an impression of faded elegance, a deliberate aesthetic choice that reinforced her cover story as a widow of means whose finances had dwindled since her husband's passing. Strategic modifications. were concealed beneath the veneer of 19th century architecture. Reinforced doors, specialized locks, and discreet surveillance equipment that monitored every approach to her residence. What appeared to be antique furnishings with worn upholstery actually contained hidden compartments for equipment, documents, and, when necessary, weapons. Camille moved to her writing desk, retrieving a leather-bound journal from a hidden drawer. Opening it to a fresh page, she recorded the date and her observations with meticulous precision. October 12, 2023. Keller gang surveillance initiated at approximately 7:20 p.m. 4 members present: Vincent Keller, Michael Reese, Thomas Quinn, and likely Derek Lambert, partial visual confirmation only. Targeting pattern consistent with previous operations. Preliminary surveillance lasting 3 to 4 days, followed by initial contact through artificial coincidence. Estimated timeline to approach: 72 hours. She added this entry to dozens of similar notations chronicling her previous operations. Each page documented the systematic dismantling of criminal enterprises whose leaders had fatally underestimated a woman they perceived as physically impaired. Before we jump to the next part of this story, let me know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, and if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed. Tomorrow's video reveals an unexpected twist you won't want to miss. Camille closed the journal and moved to the large mirror hanging in her dressing room. With practiced hands, she adjusted the specialized brace concealed beneath her long skirt. The device that created her convincing limp when activated but allowed complete mobility when released. The technical ingenuity had cost a small fortune, custom designed by a theatrical effects specialist who believed he was creating equipment for an avant-garde production. The transformation went beyond the mechanical. Camille had spent months perfecting the psychological aspects of her performance, the slight wince when turning too quickly, the careful calculation visible in her eyes when approaching stairs, the particular way her shoulders tensed when navigating uneven surfaces. These subtle details sold the deception far more effectively than the physical limp alone. From another hidden compartment, this one concealed behind a false panel in her wardrobe, Camille extracted a small silver locket. Inside was a photograph of Thomas Foster, her late husband, his expression serious beneath his neatly trimmed beard. Adjacent to the photograph was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age, its headline still clear despite the passing years. Assistant: District Attorney Foster killed in suspicious accident. 3 years, Thomas, she whispered. 7 down, and the Keller gang makes 8. Her crusade had begun beside a rain-soaked grave, a widow's grief crystallizing into purpose. Thomas had been investigating connections between organized crime and city officials when his brake lines were mysteriously cut. The police investigation had concluded with suspicious haste, ruling it an unfortunate accident despite compelling evidence to the contrary. With her background in behavioral psychology and her husband's case files secretly preserved despite official orders to surrender them, Camille had methodically identified the criminal organizations most likely responsible for Thomas's death. Rather than seeking conventional vengeance, she had developed an approach uniquely suited to her understanding of criminal psychology, becoming the perfect victim. The strategy had proven devastatingly effective. Criminal organizations that maintained sophisticated defenses against law enforcement had no protocols for dealing with a seemingly vulnerable widow who appeared to possess valuable assets but lacked the capacity to protect them. Eliza appeared in the doorway, interrupting Camille's reflections. "I've prepared the guest room as you requested, fresh linens, pre-dosed water carafe, and the modified locks." "Excellent." Camille returned the locket to its hiding place. "And the background materials on our visitors?" "On your desk." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Most interesting? Reading particularly regarding young Mr. Keller. Did you know his father was once employed by Lockwood National Bank? The same bank that foreclosed on dozens of properties during the financial crisis. Camille raised an eyebrow. Including several buildings now mysteriously owned by shell companies connected to our city council president. The very same. Eliza's expression conveyed volumes. Coincidences do accumulate in the most fascinating patterns. Camille moved to the window, gazing down at the street where Vincent Keller and his associates had stationed themselves beneath a street lamp. Their posture exuded the particular confidence of men who had never faced meaningful consequences. "They'll make their first approach tomorrow," she predicted. "Probably a staged accident or unexpected encounter designed to appear coincidental. And you'll be ready." It wasn't a question. "I've been ready since Thomas was buried." Camille's voice carried no emotion, just calm certainty. "The Keller gang represents something larger than ordinary criminality, Eliza. They're the public face of corruption that extends into the highest levels of Lockwood's governance. Dismantling them isn't just about justice for Thomas. It's about breaking a system that protects criminals while sacrificing ordinary citizens." Eliza nodded solemnly. "I'll prepare your special tea blend for tomorrow morning. You'll need your wits about you." Indeed. Camille picked up a folder containing her research on Vincent Keller and his associates. "And perhaps wear your blue dress, the one with the oversized pockets. I may need you to carry additional equipment if we proceed to Phase 2 more quickly than anticipated." As darkness settled over Lockwood Heights, Camille continued her preparations with methodical precision. She reviewed dossiers on each gang member, memorizing personal details that might prove useful. Family connections, known vices, potential pressure points. She calibrated her specialized brace to create the precise degree of impairment, significant enough to appear limiting but not so severe as to strain credibility. Most importantly, she rehearsed her psychological approach. Vincent Keller had a documented history of targeting what he perceived as easy victims, particularly older women and those with physical limitations. His confidence bordered on pathological, a trait Camille had exploited in similar targets. Men like Keller couldn't resist demonstrating their power over those they considered weaker. That compulsion would be his undoing. The grandfather clock in her hallway chimed midnight as Camille completed her preparations. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of an elaborate performance that would ultimately dismantle not just the Keller gang, but potentially the corrupt network supporting them. The stakes extended beyond personal vengeance into territory Thomas would have recognized: the systematic pursuit of justice within a compromised system. Camille extinguished the lamps in her apartment, save for a single reading light visible. From the street, a calculated detail suggesting an elderly woman reading before bed. From her now darkened balcony, she confirmed that 2 of Keller's men remained on surveillance duty, having established a position in the alley across from her building. Their presence confirmed her timeline. By this hour tomorrow, the first phase of her operation would be underway. By the end of the week, the carefully constructed facade of the Keller gang's operations would begin to fracture under pressure applied with surgical precision. Returning to her bedroom, Camille released the mechanism on her specialized brace, allowing herself the luxury of moving normally in the privacy of her quarters. She performed a series of stretching exercises designed to counteract the physical strain of maintaining her false impairment, another ritual developed during her 18 months of covert operations. As she prepared for bed, Camille caught her reflection in the mirror. At 46, her face carried the subtle markers of grief that no performance could entirely conceal. The loss of Thomas had transformed her in ways beyond her professional evolution, from behavioral psychologist to covert vigilante. The woman, who had once specialized in rehabilitating criminal offenders, now dedicated herself to ensuring they faced consequences that the justice system had failed to deliver. "They see the limp, Thomas," she whispered to the empty room. "They never see me coming until it's too late." Dawn broke over Lockwood Heights with the muted golden light of mid-autumn. Camille awoke before her alarm, already mentally rehearsing the day's strategy. Her morning routine included a series of exercises that few would associate with a woman believed to be partially disabled. Strength training, flexibility work, and combat drills adapted from various martial arts disciplines. By the time Eliza arrived at 7 o'clock, Camille had transformed back into the limping widow, her specialized brace activated, her posture adjusted to suggest chronic pain and limited mobility. Even her vocal patterns shifted subtly, introducing occasional pauses as if speaking required additional effort, a detail that completed the illusion of frailty. "Your morning correspondence, Mrs. Foster," Eliza announced, playing her role with practiced precision as she set a small tray on the breakfast table. The envelope on top bore the official seal of the Lockwood Heights Municipal Court, another piece in Camille's elaborate operation. "Thank you, Eliza," Camille replied, her voice carrying the carefully cultivated weariness that had become her public signature. "And has there been any unusual activity outside this morning?" "Indeed. One of those unsavory young men from yesterday appears to be monitoring the building from the cafe across the street, attempting to appear inconspicuous and failing rather spectacularly." Camille suppressed a smile. Everything was proceeding exactly as anticipated. "I believe I'll visit the market this morning. The fresh air might alleviate my discomfort." "Shall I accompany you?" Eliza asked, the question carrying layers of meaning beyond its surface simplicity. "No, I think I'll manage on my own today. The independence is important for my condition." Camille's response confirmed that she intended this as an opportunity for the Keller gang to make their first approach. After breakfast, Camille dressed with deliberate care, selecting clothing that enhanced the impression of wealth while simultaneously suggesting vulnerability. A cashmere sweater in soft grey, a skirt that hampered quick movement, and a vintage brooch containing a concealed camera completed her ensemble. The specialized brace beneath her clothing was adjusted to its most restrictive setting, creating the pronounced limp that had become her trademark in Lockwood Heights. At precisely 10:30, she emerged from her building onto Marlow Street, moving with the cautious gait of someone for whom each step required calculation. Her ornate walking cane, which concealed several specialized tools, including a high-tensile wire that could function as a restraint, tapped rhythmically against the cobblestones as she made her way toward the market. From the corner of her eye, Camille noted Michael Ruse rising from his table at the cafe, abandoning a half-finished coffee to follow her at a discreet distance. His attempts at surveillance were almost comically obvious to her trained eye, too consistent a distance, too deliberate an avoidance of direct eye contact. The market square bustled with mid-morning activity. Vendors called out their offerings as shoppers navigated between stalls filled with produce, baked goods, and artisanal crafts. Camille moved purposefully toward a flower stall at the far end of the square, knowing the route would require navigating the uneven cobblestones that edged the central fountain, the perfect setting for a coincidental encounter. She sensed, rather than saw, Vincent Keller's approach, his timing predictably opportunistic as she reached the most challenging section of walkway. His manufactured collision was skillfully executed, sufficient force to unbalance her while maintaining the appearance of accident. "Oh my goodness," he exclaimed with practiced concern as Camille deliberately lost her balance, her cane clattering dramatically to the cobblestones. "I'm so terribly sorry, ma'am. Here, let me help you." Vincent's strong hands gripped her arms, steadying her with a show of gentlemanly concern that never reached his eyes. Up close, Camille could see the calculating assessment behind his solicitous expression, evaluating her jewelry, her apparent wealth, and most importantly, her vulnerability. "Thank you, young man," she responded, infusing her voice with breathless gratitude and subtle pain. "I'm afraid I'm not as steady as I once was. Please, let me assist you. Vincent Keller, at your service." He retrieved her cane with a flourish, using the moment to position himself beside her. "Are you hurt? Can I help you to a bench?" "You're too kind, Mr. Keller. I'm Camille Foster." She allowed him to guide her toward a nearby bench, noting how he subtly positioned himself to support her weight, testing her level of impairment while establishing physical contact. As they settled on the bench overlooking the market square, Camille observed Michael Ruse moving into position nearby, maintaining visual contact while affecting interest in a newspaper vendor. The coordination confirmed her assessment of their operation, professional enough to maintain basic surveillance protocols, but overconfident in their approach. "Do you live in the neighborhood, Mrs. Foster? I don't believe I've had the pleasure of making your acquaintance before today." Vincent's charm was practiced, his smile revealing precisely calculated warmth. "Yes, the Victorian on Marlow Street. It's been my home for nearly 20 years, though I find myself venturing out less frequently these days." She gestured toward her leg with a small, resigned smile. "My condition makes outing something of an adventure." Vincent's expression showed perfectly calibrated sympathy. "An injury. An unfortunate accident 3 years ago. The doctors did what they could, but some damages can't be fully repaired." The partial truth formed the foundation of her most convincing deceptions. "My late husband always handled such practical matters. Since his passing, I've had to learn independence, however awkwardly." The mention of widowhood triggered the predatory gleam Camille had anticipated, quickly masked but unmistakable to her trained eye. Vincent Keller saw before him the perfect target, physically impaired, living alone, and in possession of valuable property. "I understand completely," he replied, his voice softening. "My own mother struggled after my father's passing. The practical matters of life can become overwhelming when faced alone." The personal connection was smoothly delivered, establishing false commonality while gathering information. Camille responded with carefully measured vulnerability, revealing precisely the details that would position her as an ideal victim for the Keller gang's particular methodology. "You're very kind to understand. So many young people have no patience for those of us who move a bit more slowly through the world." She adjusted her position with a slight wince. "I should probably return home soon. My housekeeper worries if I'm gone too long. Allow me to escort you," Vincent offered immediately, exactly as she had anticipated. "These cobblestones are treacherous even for those without mobility challenges." As Vincent helped her rise, positioning himself at her side with an arm solicitously offered for support, Camille caught the subtle hand signal he directed toward Michael Ruse, a gesture indicating continued surveillance was required. The first connection had been established precisely according to her timeline. Phase 1 was complete. The walk back to her residence provided ample opportunity for Vincent to continue his assessment while establishing himself as a potential ally. Camille noted how carefully he guided her across streets, his attentiveness creating the impression of genuine concern while allowing him to evaluate security features of her building. "This is a magnificent property," he remarked as they approached the Victorian townhouse. "These historic buildings have such character, though I imagine the maintenance must be challenging." "Indeed," Camille agreed, injecting a note of weary resignation into her voice. "The heating system is particularly troublesome. I've had such difficulty finding reliable service people since Mr. Washam retired. These newer companies charge absurd rates for simple repairs." The bait was set. A wealthy widow struggling with property maintenance represented a perfect entry point for the Keller gang's established pattern of infiltration. They typically began by offering discounted services before gradually escalating to protection arrangements and eventually complete takeover of vulnerable properties. At her doorstep, Camille completed the performance with perfect precision. "Mr. Keller, you've been so kind. I don't suppose you might know someone reliable who could look at my heating system before winter arrives? I'd be happy to pay a fair price for quality work." Vincent's expression brightened with calculated enthusiasm. "As a matter of fact, Mrs. Foster, my associate Thomas specializes in heating systems. I'd be happy to have him stop by to provide an estimate. No charge, of course. We look after our neighbors in Lockwood Heights. That would be wonderful." Camille infused her response with pathetic gratitude. "Perhaps tomorrow afternoon. I have a doctor's appointment in the morning. Tomorrow afternoon would be perfect. Shall we say 2 o'clock? As Vincent took his leave with exaggerated courtesy, Camille allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. The Keller gang had taken the bait with predictable eagerness, already plotting their approach to what they perceived as an easy mark. They saw only what she wanted them to see, a vulnerable widow with valuable assets and limited protection. What they couldn't possibly know was that they had just initiated contact with the architect of their downfall. Behind the limp and beneath the facade of frailty, Camille Foster had set in motion the first phase of an operation meticulously designed to dismantle their criminal enterprise piece by calculated piece. Precisely at 2 o'clock the following afternoon, Vincent Keller returned to Camille's townhouse, accompanied by Thomas Quinn, a wiry man whose weathered face and calloused hands suggested legitimate mechanical experience, though Camille's research indicated his primary expertise lay in breaking and entering. The contrast between them was striking. Vincent in his tailored charcoal suit projecting respectable business acumen, while Thomas wore worn work clothes that established their facade of professional services. "Mrs. Foster, thank you for allowing us to help with your heating concerns." Vincent's voice carried the practiced sincerity of a confidence man as Camille greeted them at the door, her movements deliberately slower than necessary. "This is Thomas. In Quinn, the specialist I mentioned." "A pleasure, ma'am." Thomas nodded respectfully, though his eyes performed a rapid assessment of the entryway's valuables, the crystal chandelier, antique console table, and framed artwork. His gaze lingered momentarily on the security features, cataloguing potential challenges with professional precision. "The furnace is in the basement," Camille explained, gesturing toward the hallway with a trembling hand. "I'm afraid I can't manage those stairs myself anymore. My housekeeper normally handles such things, but she's visiting her sister in Blackfield today." The subtle message that she was alone and unable to access certain areas of her home registered immediately in the men's expressions. Vincent's smile widened fractionally, while Thomas adjusted his tool belt with renewed purpose. "No need to trouble yourself, Mrs. Foster," Vincent assured her. "Why don't you rest in your parlor while Thomas examines your heating system? These old Victorians can be terribly drafty. I'd be happy to discuss potential solutions with you while he works." The division of labor was exactly as Camille had anticipated. Thomas would use the furnace inspection to scout the property's layout and security vulnerabilities, while Vincent would extract valuable information through seemingly innocent conversation. "You're too kind," she replied, allowing Vincent to assist her into the formally appointed parlor. Her specialized brace was adjusted to its most restrictive setting, creating the impression of significant impairment as she lowered herself into an antique wingback chair, positioned to face away from the surveillance camera concealed in an ornamental sconce. As Thomas disappeared toward the basement, Vincent settled into the sofa opposite Camille, his posture suggesting respectful attention, while his eyes continued their covert assessment of the room's contents. "Your home is absolutely charming, Mrs. Foster. These original architectural details." are impossible to replicate in modern construction. My husband insisted on preserving the historical elements when we renovated, Camille replied, strategically introducing Thomas into the conversation. He was quite particular about maintaining the integrity of the period details, especially after inheriting his family's collection. Vincent's interest visibly sharpened. Collection, primarily horological pieces, antique timepieces, Camille elaborated, gesturing toward an elegant mantel clock. That one is relatively modest, but Thomas had quite an eye for valuable mechanical craftsmanship. The more significant pieces are in the upstairs study. The mention of valuable collectibles accomplished exactly what Camille intended, providing motivation beyond the property itself. Vincent leaned forward slightly, his practiced charm intensifying. You must find such treasures comforting, having these connections to your late husband. How long has it been since his passing, if you don't mind my asking? 3 years this December, Camille replied, allowing genuine emotion to color her voice. He was assistant district attorney for Lockwood County. His accident was unexpected. Vincent's expression revealed momentary surprise, quickly masked by sympathetic concern. Assistant District Attorney Foster was your husband. I remember reading about his tragic accident. The entire community felt that loss. What Vincent couldn't possibly know was how carefully Camille was observing his reaction, the slight tension in his shoulders, the fractional narrowing of his eyes at the mention of Thomas's position. Her background in behavioral psychology had trained her to recognize micro-expressions that most people missed, particularly indicators of concealed recognition. You're very kind to say so, she responded, introducing a tremor into her hand as she reached for her tea. Though I sometimes wonder if it truly was an accident. Thomas had been investigating some rather sensitive cases before his death. The subtle implication of potential foul play was another calculated move, designed to gauge Vincent's reaction while establishing her character as harboring suspicions but lacking the capability to pursue them, a perfect combination of knowledge and powerlessness that would make her appear both valuable and vulnerable to the Keller operation. Vincent recovered smoothly, leaning forward to assist with her teacup. Such terrible losses often leave us searching for greater meaning or explanation. Mrs. Foster, I'm sure the authorities conducted a thorough investigation. They claim to... Camille allowed a note of bitter resignation to enter her voice, though certain evidence seemed overlooked. But what can a widow with limited mobility do against a system determined to close uncomfortable cases quickly? A question hung in the air, painting the precise picture Camille intended, a woman with potentially damaging information, but no means to effectively use it. Vincent's expression reflected calculated sympathy as he formulated his response, but was interrupted by Thomas's return from the basement. "Ma'am, I've had a look at your furnace," Thomas announced, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's an older model, but the issues are fixable. Main problem is the circulation pump needs replacing, and there's some minor calibration needed for the thermostat system." "That sounds rather technical," Camille responded with deliberate bewilderment. "Is it terribly expensive to repair?" Thomas exchanged a quick glance with Vincent, a silent communication that confirmed their shared strategy. "Normally, parts and labor would run close to 2,000, he explained, "but Mr. Keller has a special program for community members in your situation. We could handle it for half that, as a courtesy." "That's still quite significant on a fixed income," Camille sighed, introducing financial limitations to her character profile. "But winter approaches, and heat is hardly optional," Vincent smoothly interjected. "Perhaps we could discuss a payment arrangement that would be more comfortable for you. Our community support initiative offers various options for valued neighbors." His emphasis on valued neighbors carried subtle significance. The initial overture in what would eventually become a protection scheme. "That's extraordinarily kind," Camille replied, infusing her voice with pathetic gratitude. "When could you begin the repairs?" "Thomas could start tomorrow," Vincent offered, his demeanor suggesting benevolent generosity. "And while he's working, perhaps I could have my associate Michael examine some of those other maintenance concerns you mentioned. The loose railing on your back steps, was it?" Camille had mentioned no such railing, but she nodded gratefully, recognizing the tactic. They were creating reasons to access different areas of her property, establishing a presence while gradually mapping the building's vulnerabilities. The approach was textbook confidence scheme methodology, executed with professional precision. "That would be wonderful," she agreed, "though I should warn you that my housekeeper returns tomorrow. Eliza is rather protective of me since Thomas's passing." The subtle warning accomplished two purposes, establishing that she wouldn't always be alone, while simultaneously emphasizing that her primary protection came from another older woman, hardly a significant security concern for men like Vincent and Thomas. As they finalized arrangements for the following day, Camille maintained her performance with meticulous attention to detail. Her hand trembled slightly when signing the service agreement Vincent produced. Her movements remained painfully slow, and her conversation occasionally wandered into the rambling patterns associated with elderly isolation. When the men finally departed, promising to return at 9 the following morning, Camille allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to maintain her character, in case they were observing from outside, before straightening her posture and disengaging the mechanism on her specialized brace. Free from the artificial constraints, she moved with fluid precision to her surveillance control center concealed behind the library bookshelves. "Computer, activate comprehensive monitoring," she commanded, her voice entirely transformed, crisp, authoritative, and lacking any trace of fragility. Multiple screens illuminated, displaying feeds from hidden cameras positioned throughout the townhouse. Camille reviewed the footage methodically, paying particular attention to Thomas's exploration of the basement. As she suspected, his inspection of the furnace had been perfunctory at best. The majority of his time had been spent examining entry points, electrical panels, and the structural layout of the lower level. Most interesting was a moment when he believed himself unobserved, carefully picking the lock on her storage room door before photographing the interior with his phone. The room contained nothing of actual value, merely props arranged to suggest careless wealth, including empty antique jewelry boxes and decorative items designed to appear valuable while being worthless reproductions. Equally revealing was the footage of Vincent in the parlor during moments when Camille had excused herself briefly. His cursory examination of her desk drawers and quick assessment of the room's surveillance angles demonstrated professional experience rather than opportunistic curiosity. "Exactly as anticipated," Camille murmured, making notes in her secure digital journal. Phase 2 proceeding on schedule. She activated a secure communication channel connecting with an unlisted number. After 3 rings, a gruff male voice answered. "Maddox." "Detective, this is Oracle," Camille stated, using her operational designation. "Keller Gang initial contact established. Surveillance and property assessment underway. Timeline accelerated. Probable. Incursion attempt within 72 hours, rather than the projected 5 days. Detective James Maddox, one of the few honest officers remaining in Lockwood's increasingly corrupt police department, had become an invaluable ally in Camille's operations. His official position provided crucial information and potential intervention capability, while her methods supplied the evidence his department could never legally obtain. "That matches our intelligence," Maddox confirmed. "Chatter indicates they've identified a new premium acquisition in your neighborhood. Keller's been throwing cash around downtown, suggesting they're planning something bigger than usual." "The Council President's Development Project," Camille concluded. They need my property to complete the block for the new commercial zone. Likely. City planning conveniently updated zoning restrictions last week. Properties like yours suddenly require historical compliance upgrades, costing more than most owners can afford. The pattern was familiar. Arbitrary regulation changes forcing property sales, followed by mysterious fires if owners resisted. The Keller gang served as enforcers for Lockwood's corrupt officials, a relationship that had flourished since Thomas Foster's investigation was abruptly terminated along with his life. "I'm proceeding with the established protocol," Camille informed him, prioritizing evidence collection on the financial connections between Keller and Councilman Winters. "We'll need documentation of the initial threats before escalating to the property acquisition phase." "Be careful, Oracle," Maddox warned, his voice lowering. "Internal Affairs started asking questions about my case files yesterday. Someone's nervous about our progress. All the more reason to accelerate. The second wave arrives tomorrow. Furnace repair, providing cover for comprehensive security assessment." After concluding the call, Camille moved to her workshop, a converted bedroom, where specialized equipment lined the walls. From a secure cabinet, she retrieved several additional surveillance devices, each disguised as ordinary household objects: a wall thermostat containing a high-definition camera, electrical outlets with integrated audio recording capabilities, and a smoke detector that functioned as both thermal imaging device and wireless transmission interceptor. Working methodically, she installed these devices at strategic locations throughout the townhouse, focusing on areas Thomas had shown particular interest in during his reconnaissance. Each placement was calculated to capture evidence of the Keller gang's escalating criminal enterprise, while maintaining her cover as an oblivious, vulnerable target. In her bedroom, Camille opened the false bottom of her jewelry box, revealing a slim silver flash drive. The device contained encrypted evidence compiled over 18 months of investigation, financial records, surveillance footage, and witness testimonies establishing connections between the Keller gang, Councilman Winters, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding Thomas's death. "Almost there, Thomas," she whispered, securing the drive in its hiding place. "They've taken the bait perfectly." As evening settled over Lockwood Heights, Camille observed a black sedan parking across from her townhouse, Michael Ruse beginning the overnight surveillance that she had predicted in her operational timeline. The Keller gang was investing significant resources in her property, suggesting this acquisition held particular importance to their employers. Camille smiled grimly as she prepared for bed, mentally reviewing tomorrow's choreography. Vincent and his associates believed themselves to be the predators, methodically closing in on a helpless victim. They couldn't possibly understand that every hesitant step of her pronounced limp, every trembling reach for support, every grateful smile at their false kindness was precisely calculated to draw them deeper into an operation that would ultimately dismantle not just their criminal enterprise, but the corrupt power structure it served. Let them mock her limp. Let them believe her vulnerability. By the time they realized their catastrophic error in judgment, Camille Foster would have already sprung a trap 3 years in the making. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight as Camille completed her final preparations. Michael Ruse's surveillance sedan had departed 30 minutes earlier, replaced by Derek Lambert in a nondescript pickup truck. The Keller gang maintaining continuous observation while rotating personnel. Their dedication confirmed her property's significance to whatever larger operation they served. Once certain she was unobserved, Camille moved to the center of her bedroom and initiated the transformation that no one in Lockwood Heights had witnessed. Standing before her full-length mirror, she released the concealed mechanism on her specialized brace. The device retracted with a soft, mechanical whisper, its weight lifting from her body. Without the deliberate constraints of her disguise, Camille Foster was an entirely different woman. She stood straight-backed and athletic, her movements fluid and precise as she began the nightly training regimen that maintained her physical readiness. The regimen had evolved over 3 years, combining elements of several martial arts disciplines with practical combat techniques learned from military consultants who believed they were training a private security specialist. Her bedroom, with its delicate Victorian furnishings and pastel wallpaper, concealed a sophisticated training area beneath a recessed panel in the hardwood floor. As she activated the hydraulic lift, a section of flooring descended to reveal training mats, resistance, equipment, and a practice area for close-quarters combat techniques. Biometric systems active. Training protocol initiated, announced the discrete AI system that monitored her vital signs during workouts. Current physical efficiency rating, 94%. For the next hour, Camille moved through a series of increasingly demanding exercises, strength conditioning, flexibility drills, and combat simulations against virtual opponents projected by concealed equipment. Her movements displayed none of the frailty she projected publicly, instead revealing the controlled power of someone who had transformed grief into lethal capability. Simulation complete, the AI finally announced. Recommended recovery, hydration, and protein supplement. Camille toweled the perspiration from her face, her breathing returning to normal with practiced efficiency. Computer, display Keller Gang profiles with updated intelligence. The mirror's surface transformed into a high-resolution display, showing detailed dossiers on each gang member. Vincent Keller's profile appeared first, highlighting his background, from privileged upbringing, through his father's banking position, through expulsion from business school for ethical violations, to his current role as the public face of an organization that specialized in property acquisition through escalating intimidation. Thomas Quinn's history revealed multiple arrests for breaking and entering, though charges had mysteriously disappeared each time. His technical expertise had been developed during military service, followed by dishonorable discharge for theft of equipment. His specialization within the gang focused on security assessment and system compromise. Michael Reese and Derek Lambert completed the core team, Reese handling financial transactions and money laundering, while Lambert served as primary enforcer, with 3 suspected homicides attributed to him but never proven in court. Computer, update operational timeline based on today's observations, Camille instructed. The display shifted to show a probability matrix predicting the gang's likely escalation pattern. According to the analysis, tomorrow's furnace repair would include comprehensive surveillance installation and security vulnerability assessment. This would be followed by initial light intimidation within 48 hours, escalating to direct threats within 5 days, culminating in either forced property transfer or accidental fire within 2 weeks. Accelerate timeline projections by 30%. Camille directed, reflecting her observation that the Keller gang was moving more aggressively than in previous operations. And display known associates of Councilman Winters with financial connections to Lockwood Development Partners. A complex network diagram appeared, connecting multiple city officials to the development consortium that had been systematically acquiring properties throughout Lockwood Heights. The pattern revealed a clear strategy, creating a continuous property block for a planned luxury commercial complex. Camille's Victorian townhouse represented one of the final acquisitions needed to complete the assembled parcel. Cross-reference. With Thomas Foster's final case notes, she instructed, the system overlaid additional data points from her late husband's investigation, revealing striking correlations. Several witnesses Thomas had planned to interview had subsequently withdrawn cooperation, relocated unexpectedly, or in 2 disturbing cases, died in accidents similar to his own. Camille studied the patterns with clinical detachment, her expression betraying none of the emotional turmoil such connections might have once triggered. 3 years of systematic pursuit had transformed raw grief into focused purpose, personal vendetta into methodical justice-seeking. Notification. The system announced, Detective Maddox has uploaded new intelligence data. The display shifted to show financial records indicating large cash transfers from Lockwood Development Partners to an offshore account linked to Vincent Keller. The timing coincided with the mysterious fire that had destroyed the historic Hamilton building 3 blocks away, another property that had resisted selling to the development consortium. The pattern confirms our theory, Camille noted, making a voice record. Direct financial compensation for targeted property acquisition through criminal means. If we can document the escalation process with my property, we establish the operational template that connects Winters to multiple instances of similar criminal conspiracy. She deactivated the display and returned her training equipment to its concealed position beneath the floor. Moving to her workshop, Camille retrieved several specialized devices she had developed for tomorrow's phase of the operation. The first appeared to be an ordinary silver pendant on a delicate chain, elegant, but not ostentatiously valuable. And in reality, it contained a sophisticated audio recording system with direct transmission capability to her secure server. Unlike conventional recording devices that might be detected in a professional sweep, this utilized experimental technology, borrowed from military applications, capturing sound vibrations through bone conduction rather than conventional microphones. Next came what looked like an antique pill case, its ornate exterior concealing a chemical analysis system capable of detecting common sedatives and incapacitating agents. The Keller gang had a documented history of drugging vulnerable targets to facilitate property access or force signature on fraudulent documents. Most important was a seemingly decorative brooch that functioned as emergency signaling device, connecting directly to Detective Maddox's secure channel if activated. Despite her extensive preparation, Camille recognized the inherent risks in allowing dangerous criminals into her home. Contingency planning had been essential to her survival across 7 previous operations. As she arranged these devices with her clothing for the morning, Camille reviewed the psychological approach she would employ with each gang member. Vincent responded to deference and gratitude, his ego requiring constant reinforcement. Thomas displayed discomfort with direct eye contact, suggesting exploitable insecurities about his social status. Michael Ruse exhibited classic signs of gambling addiction based on his financial patterns, indicating potential leverage if needed. The most dangerous variable remained Derek Lambert, whose psychological profile suggested sociopathic tendencies and impulse control issues. If Lambert accompanied the team tomorrow, rather than maintaining external surveillance, Camille would need to adjust her vulnerability performance to account for his more volatile reactions. Her preparations complete, Camille moved to the kitchen to prepare a special tea blend containing natural compounds that would help her maintain the physical manifestations of her character. Subtle muscle relaxants that created genuine tremors in her hands, mild antihistamines that reddened her eyes and produced occasional coughing, botanical elements that temporarily lowered blood pressure to enhance pallor. These physiological manipulations complemented the mechanical aspects of her disguise, creating an illusion so comprehensive that even medical professionals had been convinced of her disability during scheduled appointments. Appointments strategically arranged to establish her condition in official records that the Keller gang would inevitably access during their background research. As the tea steeped, Camille activated a secure video channel on her kitchen tablet, connecting with Eliza Harrison at her sister's home in Blackfield. "Everything is proceeding as anticipated," Camille reported when Eliza's concerned face appeared on screen. They conducted preliminary surveillance today and will return tomorrow for Phase 2, comprehensive property assessment disguised as repair work. Are you certain it's wise to allow all four of them inside simultaneously? Eliza's practical nature always focused on operational security. That significantly alters the defensive calculations if they accelerate their timeline. Precisely why I want them to feel numerically superior, Camille explained. The more confident they become in their advantage, the more revealing their actions will be. We need documented evidence of explicit threats and intimidation tactics to connect them directly to Winters and the Development Consortium. Eliza nodded reluctantly. I've prepared the documentary evidence you requested, property assessments, tax records, and historical registration documents. All indicate your townhouse qualifies for heritage protection status, making it legally exempt from the new compliance regulations. Perfect. That creates the exact pressure point we need. A property they can't acquire through legitimate means, forcing them to employ their standard criminal methodology. And the specialized equipment, Eliza inquired, arrived this afternoon via our usual courier. The modified air quality sensors are installed in the main rooms, and the surveillance countermeasures are active but concealed. If they attempt to plant monitoring devices, we'll detect the signals while appearing to remain unaware. Their conversation continued for several minutes, fine-tuning operational details while maintaining the plausible cover story of Eliza visiting her sister. As Camille's only confidant, Eliza provided crucial support, maintaining external communications, coordinating with Detective Maddox when direct contact was too risky, and serving as emergency intervention resource if an operation veered into unanticipated territory. After concluding the call, Camille completed a final security sweep of her townhouse, checking each entry point and verifying that all defensive measures remained undetectable to professional assessment. The building's antique appearance concealed comprehensive modern security, reinforced doors disguised as original Victorian woodwork, impact-resistant glass behind decorative stained panels, and strategically positioned defensive tools hidden within seemingly ornamental architectural elements. In her bedroom once more, Camille opened the locked drawer of her nightstand, removing a small leather case. Inside lay a custom-designed defensive device that resembled an antique lady's derringer, but incorporated several modern modifications. The weapon fired non-lethal but highly effective compressed neural disruptors, providing immediate incapacitation without risking fatal outcomes that might compromise her larger operation. Contingency only, she reminded herself, securing the weapon in its concealed holder beneath her bedroom windowsill. Her operations prioritized intelligence gathering and legal prosecution rather than direct confrontation, but experience had taught her the value of preparation for worst-case scenarios. At precisely 1:30 a.m., Camille completed her final preparation for the morning's performance. Standing before her bathroom mirror, she applied specialized cosmetics that accentuated the appearance of chronic pain and sleep deprivation. Subtle shadowing beneath her eyes, strategic pallor across her cheekbones, faint discoloration, suggesting poor circulation in her extremities. These details would be registered subconsciously by her visitors, reinforcing their perception of her vulnerability without appearing theatrical. The most convincing deceptions, she had learned, incorporated elements too subtle for conscious recognition, but powerful in their cumulative effect. Returning to bed, Camille activated her specialized brace once more, allowing her body to adapt to its constraints before morning. The device's pressure points would create genuine discomfort by dawn, lending authenticity to her movements that no performance alone could achieve. This marriage of actual physical experience with calculated deception had proven devastatingly effective in her previous operations. As she drifted toward sleep, Camille's thoughts turned to Thomas, not the grief that had once consumed her, but the methodical pursuit of justice that had transformed that emotional devastation into purpose. Tomorrow would bring her one step closer to exposing not just the Keller gang's criminal operations, but the corrupt power structure that had protected Thomas's killers. "They believe the Limp makes me vulnerable," she whispered into the darkness. "They cannot imagine it makes me lethal." Dawn arrived with unseasonable fog shrouding Lockwood Heights, limiting visibility and creating an atmosphere of isolated intimacy. Around Camille's townhouse, perfect conditions for the Keller gang's preference for operational privacy. By 6:30 a.m., she had completed her physical transformation into the limping widow. The specialized brace activated to its most restrictive setting, her movements deliberately labored as she prepared the environment for her visitor's arrival. Strategic. Weaknesses were carefully arranged throughout the main floor, a partially visible document on her desk suggesting financial difficulties, prescription bottles with labels indicating pain management and sleep aids, a wall calendar marking doctor's appointments with specialists whose names suggested ongoing treatment for chronic conditions. At precisely 7:15, Camille began the biochemical aspect of her disguise, consuming the special tea blend that would create physical markers of vulnerability, mild tremors, reduced circulation, and subtle respiratory distress. These physiological effects would peak approximately 30 minutes after ingestion, coinciding with the Keller gang's scheduled arrival. The final element of her preparation involved activating the townhouse's comprehensive but undetectable monitoring systems, ensuring every interaction would be recorded with perfect clarity while appearing completely private to her visitors. "Systems active," she confirmed, her voice carrying none of the frailty it would display once her performance began. "Contingency protocols on standby." At 8:55 a.m., the security system registered a vehicle stopping outside. A commercial van with neighborhood services emblazoned on its side, the Keller gang's preferred operational cover. Camille positioned herself in the parlor, arranging her features into an expression of anxious anticipation as she activated her body-worn recording devices. The doorbell chimed at precisely 9, suggesting professional punctuality rather than criminal intent, another element of their carefully cultivated facade. Through the discreet monitor concealed in an antique picture frame, Camille observed all 4 Keller gang members on her porch, their formation revealing their operational approach. Vincent Keller stood front and center, projecting legitimate business presence. Thomas Quinn carried an actual toolbox, maintaining their service provider cover. Michael Ruse and Derek Lambert flanked the group, appearing as ordinary workers while strategically positioning themselves to control potential entry and exit points. Their presence as a complete unit confirmed Camille's assessment. Her property represented high-value acquisition, requiring their collective resources. This deviation from their usual pattern of sending team members in sequential stages suggested urgency beyond their typical operations. Taking a deep breath, Camille adjusted her expression to display grateful anticipation mingled with physical discomfort. She activated her specialized brace's most restrictive setting and grasped her ornate walking cane. "Let the performance begin," she whispered, her voice transforming into the quavering timbre of a woman whose physical limitations made her the perfect target for predators who couldn't recognize that her carefully cultivated vulnerability was, in fact, the most dangerous trap they would ever encounter. "Good morning, Mrs. Foster," Vincent called cheerfully as Camille opened the door, his smile calibrated to project trustworthy professionalism. "I hope we're not too early. I've brought my full team to address your heating concerns." Camille blinked, with calculated uncertainty at the 4 men crowding her doorway. "Oh my, I wasn't expecting quite so many of you." Her hand trembled slightly as she clutched her cane, the biochemical compounds in her morning tea taking full effect. "More hands make quick work," Vincent assured her smoothly. "You remember Thomas, of course. This is Michael, our electrical specialist, and Derek handles the heavy lifting. We thought it best to address all your home's issues in one visit, rather than disturbing you repeatedly." Camille noted Derek Lambert's barely concealed impatience as she deliberately took extra time to process this information. His psychological profile had indicated poor impulse control, a trait she could potentially exploit to accelerate their timeline or provoke revealing mistakes. "How thoughtful," she finally responded, stepping back with exaggerated care. "Please, come in. I've made coffee if anyone would like some before you begin." Vincent's team filed into her foyer, their casual demeanor belied by the precision with which they positioned themselves, Derek establishing sightlines to all potential exits, Michael subtly examining the electrical panel partially visible. Through the utility room doorway, Thomas already assessing the architectural layout with professional efficiency. "Coffee would be lovely," Vincent replied, gesturing for his men to set down their equipment. "Thomas can begin examining your furnace while we discuss the additional services we might provide." The strategic division of their team proceeded exactly according to Camille's prediction. Thomas immediately descended to the basement, Michael drifted toward the electrical systems, and Derek positioned himself near the front windows, ostensibly examining the frames for drafts, while actually maintaining surveillance of the street outside. "I'm afraid the kitchen is a bit of a walk," Camille apologized, beginning her painstakingly slow progress down the hallway. These old houses weren't designed with mobility challenges in mind. "Allow me to assist you," Vincent offered, taking her elbow with solicitous concern that nonetheless positioned him to control her movements. "Have you lived alone in this magnificent home since your husband's passing?" "Yes, though Eliza, my housekeeper, comes daily," Camille replied, deliberately introducing information that would later become crucial. "She's quite devoted, nearly 30 years with our family." In the kitchen, Camille made a performance of struggling with the coffee service, her hands trembling as she poured. Vincent quickly stepped in to assist, exactly as she'd anticipated. His small act of kindness established physical proximity while creating a psychological dynamic of dependence. "You mentioned your husband was Assistant District Attorney Foster," Vincent noted casually, carrying the coffee tray she'd struggled with. "His cases must have been fascinating." "Thomas rarely discussed specific details," Camille replied, introducing a calculated hook, though he was quite disturbed by his final investigation. Something about improper financial connections between city officials and development interests. Vincent's cup paused momentarily before reaching his lips, a micro-expression of heightened alertness that her trained eye instantly registered. "Politics and business always make uncomfortable bedfellows," he observed neutrally, "though I imagine such matters were resolved after his unfortunate accident." "See, officially, perhaps," Camille allowed a note of bitter suspicion to enter her voice. "Though Thomas kept comprehensive records, he was meticulous about documentation." The deliberate reference to potentially existing evidence produced precisely the reaction Camille had anticipated, a momentary flicker of calculated assessment in Vincent's expression, followed by intensified focus on her face. "A methodical mind is invaluable in legal work," he commented, steering the conversation toward practical matters. "Speaking of documentation, we should discuss the service agreement for today's repairs. The initial work will address your immediate heating concerns, but our inspection may reveal additional maintenance needs." As Vincent outlined their services in deliberately confusing technical terminology, Camille recorded every word through her concealed pendant device. His approach followed classic predatory methodology, establishing authority through jargon while introducing deliberately vague cost projections that would later expand exponentially. "I trust your judgment entirely," she replied, with calculated helplessness, "though I should mention my limited fixed income. Thomas's pension provides adequately for basics, but unexpected expenses have become challenging." Vincent leaned forward, his expression conveying practiced compassion. "Mrs. Foster, I understand completely. In fact, for valued community members, like yourself, we offer special payment arrangements that many find helpful during difficult times." The deliberate pause carried significant weight, the first subtle introduction of their actual agenda. Camille recognized the approach from their previously documented operations: initial positioning as solution providers, followed by gradual transition to financial entanglement that ultimately led to property acquisition. Their conversation was interrupted by Thomas's return from the basement, his expression confirming successful completion of his actual mission: comprehensive property assessment disguised as furnace inspection. "Mrs. Foster, I've examined your heating system," he announced, wiping non-existent grime from his hands. "The issues are more complex than initially apparent. The primary circulation pump requires replacement, but I'm also concerned about potential gas line irregularities." The fabricated safety issue represented a significant escalation in their timeline, introducing urgent concerns that would justify immediate action and additional personnel access. Camille had anticipated this approach but hadn't expected it so quickly, suggesting the gang was operating under external pressure to accelerate property acquisition. "Gas line problems," she repeated, infusing her voice with tremulous worry. "That sounds frightening and potentially expensive. Safety must be the priority," Vincent interjected smoothly. "Fortunately, we can begin addressing these concerns immediately. Thomas can source the necessary replacement parts while Michael examines your electrical system, which often contributes to heating inefficiency." As if on cue, Michael appeared in the doorway, his expression professionally concerned. "Mrs. Foster, I've noticed some irregular voltage readings at your main electrical panel. Given the age of this building, I'd recommend a comprehensive inspection to ensure there are no fire hazards." The coordinated approach was impressively seamless, each team member building upon the other's fabricated concerns to create a composite picture of urgent property issues requiring their immediate intervention. Less sophisticated targets would be overwhelmed by the convergence of apparent safety risks, accepting the gang's assistance with pathetic gratitude. "This all sounds rather overwhelming," Camille responded, allowing her voice to waver, "and I'm afraid today has already taxed my strength considerably. Perhaps we should continue tomorrow when my housekeeper returns. Eliza has managed these household matters since Thomas passed." The strategic mention of Eliza's return introduced a complication to their timeline, a potential witness whose presence might inhibit their more aggressive tactics. Vincent exchanged nearly imperceptible glances with his team members, silently recalibrating their approach. "Of course," he agreed with smooth professionalism, "your comfort is our primary concern. However, I am worried about those gas line irregularities Thomas identified. Carbon monoxide is odorless and can be extremely dangerous, particularly for someone in your condition." The subtle emphasis on her vulnerability represented classic manipulation tactics, using her perceived weakness as leverage to override her expressed boundaries. Vincent was establishing a pattern of concern that would eventually justify increasingly intrusive interventions for her protection. "You're very kind to worry," Camille replied, deliberately introducing uncertainty to her response. "Perhaps Thomas could at least secure the gas line before you leave. I would feel safer overnight." This carefully calculated compromise accomplished multiple objectives, appearing to accept their fabricated safety concerns while maintaining control over their timeline, creating the impression of susceptibility to manipulation while actually gathering evidence of their methodical approach. An excellent suggestion, Vincent approved, signaling Thomas with a subtle nod. We can address the immediate safety concerns today and return tomorrow for the more comprehensive repairs. His expression brightened with apparent sudden thought. In fact, why don't I personally stop by this evening to check on you, just to ensure everything is functioning properly overnight? The request for evening access represented a significant tactical development, likely intended for surveillance installation or security assessment during reduced visibility hours. Camille had anticipated this approach but hadn't expected it during their initial service visit, suggesting again that external pressures were compressing their usual operational timeline. That's not necessary, she demurred, introducing appropriate resistance to maintain plausibility. I wouldn't want to impose on your personal time. It's no imposition whatsoever, Vincent insisted, his tone striking the perfect balance between professional courtesy and gentle pressure. Community care is our founding principle. I could bring dinner as well. You mentioned struggling with meal preparation due to your condition. She had mentioned no such thing, but the fabricated detail served his purpose of establishing evening access while reinforcing her supposed helplessness. The technique was sophisticated manipulation, creating false familiarity and shared understanding, to override potential objections. Well, when you put it that way, Camille relented, allowing a hint of flattered gratitude to color her expression. Though nothing elaborate, please. My dietary restrictions are rather limiting these days. Excellent. Vincent's satisfaction was barely concealed. Shall we say 7 o'clock? That should give Thomas adequate time to secure your gas line and prepare recommendations for tomorrow's repairs. As Vincent coordinated his team's activities, Camille observed their operational methods with clinical detachment. Derek was systematically examining window and door frames throughout the ground floor, ostensibly checking for drafts while actually assessing security vulnerabilities. Michael had disappeared upstairs, his electrical inspection providing cover for comprehensive surveillance of the private living areas. Thomas had returned to the basement with equipment that Camille's trained eye recognized as containing far more than standard furnace repair tools. Their efficiency confirmed her assessment. This was no opportunistic criminal operation, but a highly coordinated team with established methodologies and professional experience. The precision of their approach made them dangerous but also predictable, following patterns she had documented across their previous operations. By noon, the Keller gang had completed their initial assessment of Camille's townhouse, establishing multiple pretexts for ongoing access, while gathering comprehensive intelligence about security vulnerabilities and available assets. Vincent presented her with preliminary paperwork describing necessary repairs in deliberately confusing technical terminology with strategically vague cost estimates. I'll prepare a more detailed proposal for your review tomorrow, he explained, as his team gathered their equipment. This evening, we can discuss potential payment arrangements that might better accommodate your fixed income situation. The emphasis on financial constraints was deliberate, laying groundwork for their eventual proposal of property transfer in exchange for debt forgiveness, a tactic documented in 3 of their previous operations targeting elderly homeowners. You've all been so helpful, Camille responded with carefully calibrated gratitude as she escorted them to the door, her movements deliberately pained after the extended performance. I don't know what I would have done without your assistance. As they departed, Vincent lingered momentarily on the threshold. 7 o'clock, then? Don't trouble yourself with any preparations. I'll bring everything we need. The double meaning wasn't lost on Camille, though she maintained her expression of innocent appreciation. I'll look forward to it. These evenings get rather lonely. Once the Keller gang's van had departed, Camille maintained her performance. For exactly 12 minutes, the standard duration of post-departure surveillance in their operational pattern. Only after confirming no observation devices had been activated did she straighten her posture and disengage her specialized brace. "Computer, secure communication with Eliza Harrison," she commanded, moving quickly to her monitoring station behind the library bookshelves. Eliza's concerned face appeared on screen within moments. "I've been monitoring the feeds. They've accelerated their timeline considerably. External pressure from Councilman Winters," Camille confirmed, reviewing the surveillance footage of the Keller gang's activities throughout her home. "The development project groundbreaking is scheduled for next month, according to permit applications. They need to complete property acquisition immediately. Vincent plans to return alone this evening," Eliza noted with concern. "That deviates significantly from their established pattern." "An opportunity rather than a threat," Camille corrected, displaying the surveillance images of Thomas installing miniature monitoring devices throughout her basement. "They've planted 7 surveillance devices so far. Standard commercial grade, easily detectable. Our countermeasures are feeding them modified audio and visual data showing exactly what they expect to see." "And the real purpose of Vincent's evening visit?" "Initial intimidation phase," Camille replied with clinical certainty. "He'll establish implied threats while maintaining plausible deniability. Gauge my reaction to determine resistance levels, then escalate accordingly in subsequent interactions." Eliza's expression remained troubled. "You're allowing the intimidation to proceed rather than documenting it from a distance. That's a significant risk deviation from your standard protocol. Necessary for establishing direct connection to Winters and the development consortium," Camille explained, displaying financial records on a secondary screen. "Anonymous shell companies have insulated previous operations from direct evidentiary links. I need Vincent to explicitly connect the property acquisition to the development project while issuing actionable threats." "And if he escalates beyond threats," Eliza pressed. "Derek Lambert has demonstrated violence in previous operations when targets proved resistant." "Lambert won't be present this evening," Camille replied with analytical confidence. "Vincent maintains the respectable businessman facade during initial intimidation phases. Physical enforcement only enters when financial pressure proves insufficient." Their strategic discussion continued for several minutes, analyzing the Keller gang's operational patterns while fine-tuning Camille's approach for the evening's critical interaction. By the time they concluded, Camille had formulated a precise psychological strategy to accelerate Vincent's timeline while maintaining plausible vulnerability. "I'll return before dawn," Eliza confirmed. "If anything deviates from projected parameters, activate the emergency protocol only as a last resort," Camille reminded her. "We need conclusive evidence linking Winters to the Keller gang's criminal methodology. Without that connection, we merely disrupt one operational team while leaving the corrupt structure intact." After ending the communication, Camille moved to her private training room, engaging in 30 minutes of intensive physical conditioning to counteract the effects of her morning's performance. The specialized brace created genuine muscle strain when worn for extended periods, requiring regular compensatory exercise to maintain optimal physical readiness. Following her workout, Camille reviewed the comprehensive data collected during the Keller gang's visit. Thomas's furnace inspection had included methodical examination of her basement's structural vulnerabilities. Michael's electrical assessment had provided cover for cataloging valuable items throughout the house. Derek's draft inspection had identified security weaknesses in access points. Most tellingly, Vincent had surreptitiously photographed several documents in her study, including property tax assessments and insurance papers. The pattern matched their documented methodology exactly, gathering comprehensive financial information before presenting assistance that actually created inescapable debt obligations. "Predictable," Camille murmured, reviewing the footage with clinical detachment, "and therefore manipulable." She spent the afternoon preparing for Vincent's evening visit, strategically enhancing elements of her environment to support her manufactured vulnerability while concealing sophisticated recording equipment throughout the dining room and parlor. The table was set with deliberately mismatched items suggesting financial constraints, while subtle environmental elements reinforced the impression of a home in gradual decline. Most crucial was her physical preparation, applying specialized cosmetics that enhanced her appearance of exhaustion and discomfort. The evening's performance would require particularly nuanced psychological balance, projecting sufficient vulnerability to encourage Vincent's confidence while maintaining enough awareness to extract actionable intelligence. At 6:45 p.m., Camille activated her specialized brace once more, adjusting her posture and movements to reflect increased fatigue after a demanding day. She positioned herself in the parlor with a photo album open on her lap, a calculated detail suggesting nostalgic reminiscence consistent with elderly isolation. The doorbell chimed precisely at 7 o'clock, Vincent Keller's punctuality reflecting his methodical approach to even the criminal aspects of his operation. Through the concealed monitor, Camille observed him standing alone on her porch, holding a bag from an upscale local restaurant, while projecting casual professionalism rather than predatory intent. Taking a measured breath, Camille assumed the physical and psychological attributes of her vulnerable persona once more. Tonight's performance would determine whether the Keller gang proceeded directly to explicit threats or maintained their facade of community service while gradually establishing financial control. Either approach would provide valuable evidence, but explicit threats would accelerate her timeline while enhancing the direct connection to Councilman Winters and the Development Consortium. With practiced deliberation, Camille raised herself painfully from her chair and reached for her walking cane, preparing to greet the man who believed himself the predator rather than the prey. "Mrs. Foster, I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." Vincent greeted her with practiced charm as Camille opened the door. His smile remained fixed as he assessed her deliberately enhanced appearance of fatigue. "You look exhausted. Perhaps I should come another time?" "Nonsense," Camille replied, her voice carrying the perfect blend of weariness and gratitude. "I was just reminiscing with old photographs. Your company is a welcome distraction." Vincent entered with the confident ease of someone who believed he had already established dominance over the environment. The restaurant bag he carried emitted appealing aromas, a strategic choice designed to create positive associations with his presence. "Thomas assures me your gas line is secure for the evening," he informed her as she led him toward the dining room with exaggerated slowness. "Though the comprehensive repairs will require specialized equipment tomorrow." "I'm grateful for your thoroughness," Camille responded, gesturing toward the deliberately modest table setting. "Though I worry about the expense. This old house seems determined to drain what little remains of Thomas's pension." Vincent set the food containers on the table with deliberate care, his expression shifting subtly as he prepared to introduce the next phase of his operation. "Financial concerns are precisely what I hope to discuss this evening, Mrs. Foster. I believe I might have a solution to your situation." The transition was expertly executed, establishing himself as problem solver. Before revealing the actual nature of his assistance, Camille noted the calculated timing of this pivot, occurring before they'd even begun eating. The deviation from standard confidence scheme methodology suggested urgency beyond their typical operations. "A solution sounds wonderful," she replied, with naive hope, activating her specialized recording devices with a seemingly innocent adjustment of her brooch. Though I'm afraid my options are rather limited these days. Vincent began arranging the takeout containers with unnecessary precision, a delaying tactic that allowed him to control the conversation's pacing. I couldn't help noticing the property. Assessment documents in your study. This neighborhood has become quite valuable recently. Has it? Camille infused her voice with genuine-sounding surprise. I rarely follow such matters since Thomas passed. The property taxes have increased. Certainly, but I assume that was simply the city's perpetual budget shortfalls. Far more than budget adjustments, Vincent corrected, his tone shifting toward educational condescension. Lockwood Heights has been designated for premium redevelopment. Properties in this corridor are selling for multiples of their assessed value. Camille allowed confusion to cross her features. Selling, but I have no intention of selling my home. All my memories of Thomas are here. The statement was deliberately provocative, establishing resistance that would force Vincent to reveal more of his actual agenda. His reaction was immediate and revealing, a momentary flash of frustration quickly masked by sympathetic understanding. Sentiment is natural, Mrs. Foster, but practical considerations must sometimes take precedence. He leaned forward slightly, his body language subtly more dominant. The City Council recently passed new historical compliance regulations. Buildings like yours require significant upgrades, potentially hundreds of thousands in modifications to meet code. The fabricated regulatory pressure represented classic intimidation methodology, creating artificial financial burdens to force property transfer. Camille had documented identical approaches in 3 previous Keller Gang operations targeting elderly homeowners. Compliance regulations, but that's impossible, she protested with calculated distress. I could never afford such renovations. Vincent's expression shifted to practiced compassion, though his eyes revealed calculated assessment. This is precisely why I wanted to speak privately. My organization has been authorized to present certain property owners with alternative options. What sort of options? Camille asked, deliberately projecting a combination of wariness and desperate hope. Lockwood Development Partners is prepared to purchase select properties at fair market value, handling all compliance issues and regulatory complications. Vincent retrieved a document folder from his jacket, placing it on the table with deliberate formality. As a gesture of community support, they're offering residents like yourself premium rates and relocation assistance. The direct mention of Lockwood Development Partners represented a significant tactical error on Vincent's part, explicitly connecting his activities to the consortium that employed Councilman Winters. Camille carefully maintained her expression of confused concern while her recording devices captured this crucial evidentiary link. I don't understand, she murmured, examining the documents with apparent bewilderment. These figures seem substantial, but where would I go? This has been my home for decades. Vincent's response was immediate and prepared, clearly a standard element of their acquisition script. The consortium includes assisted living facilities specifically designed for residents with mobility challenges. All amenities included, no maintenance concerns, and professional care available as needed. It sounds very efficient, Camille remarked, deliberately introducing a note of reluctance, though rather sudden. I'd need time to consider such a significant change. Vincent's expression hardened almost imperceptibly, confirming Camille's assessment that external pressures were accelerating their timeline. Unfortunately, timing is rather crucial. The compliance enforcement begins next month, with substantial daily penalties for non-conforming properties. Daily penalties? Camille repeated with perfect shocked vulnerability. But that's impossible on my fixed income. Precisely why immediate action is advisable, Vincent pressed, his tone becoming more insistent. The consortium's offer expires at the end of the week. After that, property values will likely decline once enforcement begins. The artificial deadline represented classic high-pressure tactics, creating false urgency to prevent rational consideration or external consultation. Camille allowed her hands to tremble slightly as she examined the documents, projecting emotional distress while actually documenting every element of the coercive approach. "This is all so overwhelming," she murmured, strategically introducing a new angle. Thomas always handled these matters. He was particularly adamant about preserving this property, something about historical designation protecting it from development restrictions. The reference to potential legal protection triggered an immediate shift in Vincent's demeanor, a momentary tension followed by recalibrated strategy. Historical designations have been superseded by the new safety ordinances. Councilman Winters was quite specific about compliance requirements applying to all properties in the redevelopment zone. The explicit mention of Winters in connection with targeted regulations designed to force property sales represented the evidentiary connection Camille had been seeking, direct confirmation of corrupt collusion between government officials and private development interests. "Councilman Winters?" she echoed with deliberate recognition. Thomas mentioned him frequently in the weeks before his accident, something about investigating irregular zoning changes. Vincent's expression froze momentarily, his calculating mind visibly processing this unexpected connection. "I'm sure the councilman deals with numerous regulatory matters," he deflected, suddenly focusing on serving the food he had brought. "These concerns can seem overwhelming on an empty stomach. Let's enjoy our meal while discussing the generous relocation package." His abrupt pivot confirmed the sensitivity of the Winters connection, suggesting awareness of potentially illegal coordination between the development consortium and city government. Camille allowed the conversation to shift temporarily, maintaining her vulnerable persona while strategically introducing elements of resistance that would necessitate escalating pressure tactics. As they ate, Vincent gradually transitioned from persuasion to subtle intimidation, emphasizing the unfortunate incidents that had occurred in other non-compliant properties: mysterious electrical fires, water damage from aging pipes, and break-ins targeting isolated residents. "The neighborhood is changing rapidly," he observed with calculated concern. "A woman in your condition, living alone in an increasingly unstable area, it creates significant vulnerabilities." "Are you suggesting I'm in danger in my own home?" Camille asked with perfect wide-eyed alarm. Vincent's response was masterfully balanced between explicit threat and plausible deniability. "I'm merely pointing out that transitional neighborhoods often experience unfortunate increases in opportunistic crime. Our organization can only provide protection services to participating community members." The reference to protection services completed the evidentiary pattern Camille had been documenting, establishing the full progression from initial contact through fabricated concerns to explicit intimidation, all connected to the development consortium and Councilman Winters. "I'll need to consult with my attorney before signing anything," she stated, introducing a deliberate obstacle that would necessitate increased pressure tactics. Vincent's expression hardened, the facade of helpful businessman momentarily slipping to reveal the actual enforcer beneath. "That would be unwise, Mrs. Foster. Involving outside parties often complicates these arrangements unnecessarily, and time is genuinely limited." "Even so," Camille insisted with tremulous determination, "Thomas always said never to sign legal documents without proper review." The resistance represented a calculated escalation, designed to force Vincent beyond subtle intimidation into more explicit threats. His response confirmed her psychological assessment perfectly. When faced with unexpected obstacles, he defaulted to increasing pressure rather than tactical retreat. "Mrs. Foster," he stated, his tone losing its artificial warmth entirely, "I'm trying to offer you protection from extremely unpleasant circumstances. The consortium has acquired every other property in this block. Construction begins next month regardless of your decision." He leaned forward, abandoning pretense entirely. "Remaining properties have experienced unfortunate accidents when owners proved uncooperative, electrical fires, structural failures, sometimes even personal injuries. The renovation process around an occupied building can create hazardous conditions." The explicit threat represented the final evidentiary element Camille had been working to obtain: direct intimidation connected to property acquisition for the development consortium. Her recording devices captured every word and subtle vocal inflection that transformed Vincent's statements from abstract observations into actionable criminal threats. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Keller?" she asked, her voice deliberately quavering. "I'm offering you the only viable path forward," he corrected with cold precision. "The development proceeds with or without your cooperation. The only variable is whether you benefit financially or suffer unnecessarily." With perfect timing, the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, signaling the prearranged moment for the operation's dramatic pivot. Camille allowed genuine emotion to enter her expression for the first time, not fear, but cold, focused determination that transformed her features entirely. "Thank you for being so explicit, Mr. Keller," she stated, her voice suddenly devoid of fragility or uncertainty. "Your threats against me, connected directly to Councilman Winters and Lockwood Development Partners, have now been documented and transmitted to multiple secure locations." Vincent froze, his expression cycling rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and dawning realization, as Camille rose smoothly from her chair, all traces of physical impairment vanishing as she deactivated her specialized brace with practiced efficiency. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, half rising from his seat. "Justice," Camille replied simply, her posture now revealing the athletic capability she had concealed beneath layers of manufactured vulnerability. "For Thomas Foster and 7 other property owners who suffered unfortunate accidents when they refused to cooperate with your criminal enterprise." As comprehension dawned in Vincent's eyes, the front door opened to admit Detective Maddox, accompanied by 4 officers, their timing precisely coordinated through Camille's emergency transmitter. Simultaneously, Eliza appeared from the kitchen, her expression reflecting grim satisfaction as she witnessed the culmination of their meticulously planned operation. "Vincent Keller," Maddox announced formally, "you're under arrest for criminal intimidation, conspiracy to commit fraud, and connection to ongoing racketeering operations. Your associates are already in custody, having been apprehended at your operations center approximately 20 minutes ago." As the officers secured an astonished Vincent, Camille observed his stunned expression with clinical detachment. "The limp was artificial, Mr. Keller," she explained conversationally, "as was the tremor, the weakness, and the vulnerability you so confidently exploited. My specialty is behavioral psychology, focused on predatory methodology, specifically the techniques employed by criminals who target those they perceive as defenseless." Understanding dawned in Vincent's eyes as the final pieces connected. "You were hunting us," he realized, disbelief coloring his voice. "This entire time." "Justice wears many disguises, Mr. Keller," Camille replied simply. "Sometimes the most effective one is precisely what the predator expects to see, until it's far too late to escape." 3 months after Vincent Keller's arrest, Camille Foster stood on the courthouse steps, watching as news crews gathered for Councilman Winter's indictment. The crisp autumn air carried no hint of the summer heat that had accompanied the initial stages of her operation against the Keller gang. Just as the seasons had changed, so had Lockwood Heights, transformed by the systematic dismantling of corruption that had controlled the district for nearly a decade. Camille wore no specialized brace today. Her posture was straight, her movements fluid and confident, as she observed the proceedings from a strategic distance. View connected this poised professional woman with the supposedly disabled widow who had occupied the Victorian townhouse on Marlow Street, a deliberate separation she maintained through careful public appearances and strategic timing. Mrs. Foster. She turned to find Detective Maddox approaching, his expression reflecting the complex mix of admiration and professional concern that had characterized their partnership from the beginning. "The prosecutor's office has finished preparing your testimony for next week," he informed her, keeping his voice low despite their relative isolation. Their confident Winter's connections to the Development Consortium and the Keller gangs activities have been conclusively established. Your evidence forms the cornerstone of their case. "And the historical designation for the properties?" Camille inquired, her focus characteristically extending beyond individual prosecutions to systemic reform. "Officially registered yesterday," Maddox confirmed with evident satisfaction. The Heritage Commission's expedited review found clear architectural and cultural significance. The entire Marlow Street corridor now has protected status, preventing any demolition or substantial external modification. Camille nodded, permitting herself a small smile of genuine pleasure. This outcome represented something beyond personal vindication, a structural barrier against the corruption that had claimed Thomas's life and threatened countless vulnerable residents. "The consortium's investors are scrambling to distance themselves from Winters," Maddox continued, scanning the crowd with professional awareness. "Their attorney has approached the DA about potential cooperation in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Financial conspirators becoming witnesses against political facilitators," Camille observed. "Precisely the systemic fracture we anticipated." "We wouldn't have reached this point without your operations," Maddox acknowledged, his tone reflecting grudging admiration rather than complete approval. "Though I still maintain there were less personal risks you could have taken to achieve similar outcomes." The gentle criticism acknowledged their fundamental philosophical difference. Maddox's commitment to traditional law enforcement methodology versus Camille's direct infiltration approach. Their partnership had succeeded despite this tension, perhaps even because of it, with each perspective providing necessary balance to the other. They were interrupted by the appearance of Eliza Harrison, approaching from the direction of the prosecutor's office with a slim document folder tucked under her arm. Her expression conveyed urgent purpose rather than her usual calm efficiency. "They've located the records," she announced without preamble, handing the folder to Camille. "Buried in a subsidiary company's archived correspondence. Direct communications between Winters and the Development Consortium regarding Thomas's investigation 3 years ago." Camille opened the folder with outward composure that concealed the emotional significance of this moment. Inside lay printed emails confirming what she had pursued for 3 years, explicit direction from Winters to handle the Foster situation permanently, before the assistant district attorney could file his findings on zoning corruption. "This completes the evidentiary chain," she stated, her voice betraying none of the complex emotions this confirmation triggered. "Direct connection between Thomas's death and the Development Consortium's criminal operations. The DA is adding conspiracy to commit murder to Winter's indictment," Eliza confirmed, her tone gentler than her words. "They'll announce the expanded charges at today's press conference." For a moment, the three stood in silence, acknowledging the culmination of an operation that had begun beside a rain-soaked grave and ended with comprehensive justice, not just for Thomas Foster, but for an entire community victimized by systematic corruption. "What happens now?" Maddox finally asked, the question extending beyond immediate legal proceedings to Camille's personal direction. It was a question she had confronted increasingly in recent weeks, as the Keller gang operation reached its successful conclusion. For 3 years, justice for Thomas had defined her existence, transformed her from grieving widow to calculated operative, systematically dismantling criminal enterprises that targeted vulnerable victims. With that mission now substantially complete, the future opened before her with both possibility and uncertainty. The Hargrove case in Westridge County shows similar patterns of property intimidation targeting elderly residents, she replied, revealing the analytical framework that had already begun shaping her next operation. Preliminary evidence suggests coordination between municipal officials and private security contractors with criminal backgrounds. Maddox's expression reflected both concern and resignation. "You're not stopping." It wasn't a question, but Camille answered nonetheless. "The methodology has proven effective. Predatory operations systematically target those perceived as vulnerable, the elderly, the disabled, the isolated. Conventional law enforcement struggles to penetrate these schemes because victims fear reporting or lack credibility within the system. So you'll continue placing yourself in calculated danger," Eliza observed, her tone reflecting understanding rather than judgment. "Becoming the perfect victim to expose those who prey on the genuinely vulnerable." With modifications, Camille acknowledged the limping widow has served her purpose and cannot be reused within the regional criminal networks. Future operations will require different vulnerabilities, different perceived weaknesses to exploit. The courthouse doors opened, signaling the imminent press conference announcing Winter's expanded indictment. As reporters positioned themselves for the prosecutor's statement, Camille observed their anticipation with clinical detachment. The public narrative would focus on conventional heroes, dedicated prosecutors, determined detectives, courageous witnesses, while her role would remain largely invisible, exactly as she preferred. "Your testimony next week concludes your official involvement," Maddox noted, watching her with perceptive concern. "You could transition to consultant work with the department. Your analytical skills and behavioral insights would be invaluable in a legitimate investigative context." The suggestion wasn't new. Maddox had repeatedly proposed official channels for Camille's unique capabilities, offering institutional support and legal protection rather than the isolated risk of her independent operations. "Some predators remain beyond conventional reach," she replied, the gentle rejection softened by genuine appreciation for his concern. "Effectiveness sometimes requires operating in spaces between official methodologies." Before Maddox could respond, a commotion at the courthouse entrance signaled Councilman Winter's arrival. Flanked by attorneys and pursued by reporters, the once powerful politician appeared shockingly diminished, his confident posture replaced by defensive hunching, his commanding presence reduced to furtive glances and whispered consultations. Camille observed the transformation with the specialized perception developed through years studying predatory behavior. Winter's collapse followed predictable patterns of dominant personalities facing consequences after extended impunity. The psychological framework inversely mirroring the intimidation he had authorized against vulnerable residents. "He doesn't even recognize you," Eliza observed as Winters passed within 15 feet of their position, his gaze sliding over Camille without registration or recognition. "He never saw me," Camille replied simply. "He saw only what I wanted him," To see a vulnerable widow with an artificial limp, trembling hands and exploitable isolation, the perfect victim rather than the actual threat. As the press conference began, the three retreated from the courthouse steps, moving toward the quiet park across the street where they could continue their conversation with greater privacy. The prosecutor's amplified voice announced the expanded charges against Councilman Winters, connecting his corruption directly to Thomas Foster's death 3 years earlier. "Justice finally achieved," Maddox observed, studying Camille's expression for emotional response to this long-pursued outcome. "Partial justice," she corrected with characteristic precision. "Winters faces consequences for his actions, but the systemic vulnerabilities remain largely intact. Predatory operations continue targeting those perceived as defenseless throughout the region." Her analytical assessment reflected the evolution of her mission beyond personal vengeance into something more comprehensive, addressing structural patterns that enabled exploitation rather than merely punishing individual perpetrators. Thomas's death had initiated her transformation, but her purpose had expanded beyond that singular injustice. "The Westridge County operation will require different methodology," she continued, her mind already mapping the approach for her next. Target property developers targeting seniors appear to use medical debt rather than regulatory intimidation as their primary leverage. Eliza and Maddox exchanged glances, recognizing the familiar pattern of Camille's operational planning: systematic, comprehensive and unstoppable once initiated. Her determination had dismantled the Keller gang's criminal enterprise and exposed Councilman Winters' corruption. There was little doubt she would approach future operations with equal effectiveness. "At least accept additional resources," Maddox urged, making a final attempt at introducing safety protocols into her methodology. "Surveillance support, emergency response protocols, evidentiary documentation assistance. Your official involvement creates legal complications for evidence collection," Camille reminded him gently. "The effectiveness of this approach depends on operating between conventional boundaries." Their philosophical impasse remained unresolved as they had throughout their unusual partnership. Maddox committed to working within the system despite its limitations, Camille determined to address vulnerabilities that conventional approaches couldn't effectively reach. "The prosecutor is watching us," Eliza observed quietly, nodding toward the courthouse steps where District Attorney Harrington had indeed focused momentary attention on their small group. "Inevitable professional curiosity," Camille noted without concern. The evidence supporting Winters' prosecution appeared through unorthodox channels. He suspects but cannot confirm unofficial methodologies beyond conventional investigation. The press conference concluded with announcements of additional indictments anticipated in coming weeks. The corruption investigation expanding beyond Winters to include multiple officials connected to the development consortium. The systemic impact of Camille's operation continued expanding beyond its initial targets, creating structural reform rather than merely individual accountability. As they prepared to depart, Maddox made one final observation. "The Limp may have been artificial, but the impact has been genuinely transformative for Lockwood Heights. Whatever your methods, the outcomes speak for themselves." The rare concession acknowledged what Camille had demonstrated across 8 operations targeting predatory criminal enterprises. That vulnerability, properly understood and strategically deployed, could become more effective than conventional strength when confronting those who exploited perceived weakness. "Different weaknesses reveal different predators," she replied, expressing the core insight that had transformed her from grieving widow to methodical justice seeker. "Those who mock liabilities they believe they observe reveal vulnerabilities they cannot recognize in themselves." 3 days later, Camille Foster's Victorian townhouse on Marlow Street stood empty, its contents carefully packed and removed to undisclosed storage. Neighbors reported the disabled widow had relocated to assisted living following the stress of recent events, a narrative Camille had cultivated through strategic communications and carefully managed appearances. In reality, she had established a new operational base in Westridge County, assuming a different identity with distinct vulnerabilities designed to attract attention from the predatory enterprises targeting senior residents. The limping widow had served her purpose in exposing the Keller gang and Councilman Winters. New targets required new, perceived weaknesses. As Camille established her new identity, a recently divorced woman with crippling medical debt and deteriorating cognitive function, she reflected on the evolutionary nature of her mission. What had begun as personal vengeance for Thomas's death had transformed into something more essential: systematic protection for those genuinely vulnerable to predatory operations. The developers targeting Westridge County seniors would eventually mock her apparent confusion, exploit her fabricated financial distress, and ultimately discover too late that apparent vulnerability had concealed lethal capability. The pattern would repeat with different weaknesses, different predators, but identical outcomes. Justice delivered through methodologies as unconventional as they were effective. In Lockwood Heights, justice had worn the disguise of a limping widow. In Westridge County, it would assume a different vulnerability, equally calculated and precisely deployed. The disguises might change, but the fundamental truth remained constant. Those who mocked perceived weakness inevitably exposed their own fatal blind spots, never recognizing the true threat until their operations lay in ruins and justice had been systematically, methodically achieved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.